good to be together this evening. In a moment, we'll go back and look at some of the thoughts that come out here in Luke chapter 15. But first, I want to just bring our mind and attention. Certainly, this is something that we're all very, very familiar with. In fact, that's really what the bulk of this parable that we're going to look at, it actually picks up in verse 11, builds off of this very common sense of loss, that sense of fright and excitement, and really terror when something's missing, and you want to frantically find it, and all the depths you go to try to make sure you can retrieve it. I know I'm all too familiar with this. It seems like there's always something throughout the day that I'm like I just can't find it, and then that feeling comes over you. Where did I put it? Why can't I find it? Usually for me, it's almost a sense of humility also follows it. Usually it's something like this. I'm usually walking around saying, "Beth, where's my Bible?" It's like, it's right there on your arm. I've lost track of how many times that's happened. Or where is this? It's in my hand. And so we recognize how sometimes we feel rather foolish, maybe feeling like maybe I got all excited for nothing when it really wasn't that big of a deal. But also we do know that feeling of when something really is missing, and you just, it's almost that sick feeling of, especially with something of value, something of worth, something that you treasure very much, that you just can't believe that you were careless enough or maybe just didn't realize what you were doing with it, and then realize, I don't know where it is. And I was reading an interesting story of somebody that went through that feeling. A woman in New York. Recently, she was doing some errands and things, and she came to the end of the night. She looks on her hand, and her wedding ring is missing. And all of a sudden, she realizes, I threw it in the garbage. She realizes that I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, but she realized it's in the garbage. So the only thing she knew, she looked out the window, and she saw that there was some garbage trucks out. It was late at night, and so she put a note on one of the trucks and just said, I don't know what you can do, but I live here. Here's my address. I'm missing my wedding ring. The garbage man who found that note immediately jumped into the garbage truck. He was in there for about an hour, maybe 2 hours, looking through trash, and thankfully found her wedding ring. And I love that picture here, so you can see the sense of, I can't believe you went through all of that filth and all of that trash. He was an hour in the truck. I can't imagine what his hands were digging through. But of all the things he had to go through, he said he found it in a bag of these oily rags, and I guess that was the errand she was doing. She included what she was doing. She threw them out in these rags, opens it up, and there's the wedding ring. Gives it back to her, and the rejoicing. And that's really the beauty of this story. That's what Jesus is telling people, things that we're all too familiar with. Again, we hate to be familiar with that, because that's just a sick feeling in our stomachs when something goes missing. And there was a woman who had these 5 coins, or excuse me, 10 coins, and she lost one of them. But it builds off of that. You know, we go back there to verse 3, Luke chapter 15 and verse 3. And it starts with a man who has 100 sheep, and he's lost one of them, and he has that frantic, that sick feeling of, oh no, that poor sheep, where's it at? And I gotta find it before it's too late. And he's searching and searching, hoping frantically that nothing horrible is found or happened to it. And when he finds it, the relief, it's okay. It's still alive, it's still intact. And he goes and he shares it with everybody. He says, look, I found the sheep that was lost. And as it says there in verse 4, what man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture? Go after the one which is lost until he finds it. When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. I tell you that in the same way there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And then likewise in verse 8, he says, or what woman, if she has 10 silver coins, loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she does find it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me. And you catch that, there is a parable of a man who's knocking at the door. Remember the message, leave us alone. Notice that these were instances where you didn't get that response. Because most of us, if word gets out, oh, I'm missing this, or they've lost this, everybody kind of shares that. It's a ripple effect. So no wonder the story goes that when they tell other people, they are so happy, they rejoice. I'm so happy you found it. We were so worried sick. And what a relief that you got it back. And one thing that I noticed that I find interesting about the way that Jesus stacks up these stories is that in each instance, what is lost keeps increasing in value. And also, the numbers of what still remains keep shrinking. If you start with 100 sheep and 1 out of 100, well, that seems to be worth the effort, and people recognizing, yes, absolutely, and rejoicing when they find it. Then we get a little bit higher. We're talking about something of value, something of worth. Now we're talking about actual money, a little bit maybe higher in terms of rate and what it can go for on the market. She has this coin, silver coin, and there's only 10 of these. And yet she's willing to sweep the house till she finds it. Then we get to verse 11. Now we've increased in value. We're not talking about a sheep. We're not talking about a coin. We're talking about a human being. And this father only has 2. Only has 2. And so what we see is the reasonableness of why he was so happy to find it, and the effort that it's worth to put into searching for it. And so we just want to look at these things, and it made me think of some things as I read that story, and I kept thinking, isn't that an interesting parallel? Someone was willing to root through all of the garbage and all of the trash and recognize that deep inside there's something of value, and it's worth going through that to make sure we can retrieve it. In many ways, I think that's the visual that kind of hit my mind, and really I think that's the idea, is that we are going through all of the filthy things of the world, all of the disruptive things of this world. This world is corrupt. This world is full of sin. It's just that the garbage heap that Satan has placed upon all the souls of mankind. And yet it seems like that's what we're called to do, is to sort through all of that disarray and the value of what's underneath it. That all those things that have wreaked havoc and have pulled people away from the Lord, that the Lord has come to seek and to save it, and has encouraged us to have the same mindset and see the joy what happens when we find it. But one of the things I think that truly encourages me is when I think about reminding ourselves of the value of what is lost. And certainly Jesus, over and over again, makes us understand just of what is the value of these souls. And very simply in John chapter 3, he tells us the value of every soul is measured by what Jesus was willing to do on the cross. Just as we get a picture, certainly the garbage man recognized that the value of this ring, not only the sentimental value of it, also I believe that the actual money, the dollar amount to it, obviously the sacrifice was putting into retrieving it or purchasing it, that it was worth going through that effort. And just what Jesus tries to help us understand, that we might value those souls in the same way. In John chapter 3, verse 16, he says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. He did the dirty work. This is the man jumped into that filthy garbage truck and sorted through who knows what he had to come in contact with. Jesus was willing to bear the burden of sin. That kind of defilement, the kind of thing that separates us from God. That's what sin is. Sin is described, it's a defilement. It's a defilement of our humanity. It's a defilement of our spirituality. It's a defilement of our purpose, of what God has put us on this earth to do. And sin corrupts that, and it robs it, and it pulls us away and just heaps just nothing but immorality and defiling things that corrupt us. And that's what he wanted to point us, that even though souls find themselves in the garbage heap of this defiled world, Jesus was willing to jump in the garbage truck. That's what he did. He jumped in the world of defilement. He came to the world. He wasn't at a distance just saying, well, maybe we could throw a line in there and kind of read it out. I don't want to get dirty. Jesus jumped into this world, and he allowed himself to actually heap upon himself all of that sense of guilt. Amazing. In verse 17, it says, "For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. He who believes in him is not judged. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God." And very quickly, if you go to Mark chapter 15, and what truly is amazing, we begin to again highlight in our minds the value that God places on souls of what he was willing to do to save and rescue. And we read in Mark chapter 15, beginning of verse 16. It says, "The soldiers took him away into the palace," that is the praetorium, "and they called together the whole Roman cohort. They dressed him up in purple, and after twisting a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to acclaim him, 'Hail, King of the Jews.' They kept beating his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling and bowing before him. After they had mocked him, they took the purple robe off him and put his own garments on him, and they led him out to crucify him. They pressed into service a passerby coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross." So we see the physical level of sacrifice, the mocking, the spitting, the vile treatment he received. So much to the point, physically, he's at this point weary. Remember, there was an old joke about words of caution that used to be on the backs of garbage trucks. There's a comedian used to tell a joke about it. He said, there used to be a sign that said on the back of garbage trucks, "Please do not follow too closely." And the joke was, "Another one of life's joys ruined by a muddling bureaucracy." Remember the days when we used to drive behind a garbage truck? Who does that? Why would there have to be that kind of a warning? And because just the idea of getting in there, I think that would be quite a bit of a deterrent. He was in there for an hour. I can only imagine how weakened he must have been after an hour of that, and yet the search continued. He wasn't done until he found what he was looking for. Here we find Jesus. He is weakened. He is weakened at this point. The weight, the bearing down of what he's already experienced has already brought him to such a weakened point. He physically cannot bear the instrument that he's come to be nailed to. He can't carry it. Can we appreciate the value that he has in his mind at this point? The value, I'm still going to make it. I don't know how. I can only imagine maybe that man in the garbage. I don't know how much more of this I could. Well, of course, they're garbage man. I'm sure they're used to it. I actually heard someone say you're at that point in your career, you either learn to laugh or cry about it. And most people choose to laugh about it. Just the interesting things that you get that turns your stomach. But Jesus had never been in the world before. This is his first time. He hasn't been accustomed to this. This is the first time he's ever been in such a weakened position that he cannot physically go on. This is actually the first time in his physical existence as a grown, strong man that he can't go on. And he does. Why? Because he loved the world. The value of what he knew was willing for him to press on. And so we continue reading. In verse 22, it says, Then they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. They tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots for them to decide what each man should take. It was the third hour when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, The King of the Jews. They crucified 2 robbers with him, one on his right and one on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which says that he was numbered with transgressors. Those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads, and saying, Ha, you who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes, were mocking him among themselves and saying, He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let this Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross, so that we may see and believe. Those who were crucified with him were also insulting him. You know, typically what Jesus is used to, his normal environment, are angelic beings casting their crowns and praising him. That's what he's used to. Remember what at one point he said, or John the Baptist said, He is before me. He existed before me. I have a hard enough time contemplating eternity forward. Back it up, eternity backwards. I have a hard time. I don't understand that. He always was. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He has always been there. He is there now, and he always will be. For eternity backwards, I don't even understand that. Negative million, keep going. He's used to people praising him. That's his normal environment. The first time he comes to earth, and in an attempt to obey God in the most difficult circumstances, this is what he faces. People mocking him, ridiculing him, casting insults at him, actually berating him. Oh, look at the one crucified. He can't save himself. Isn't that one of the hardest things to keep going? When someone is mocking you for doing that which is right and people don't understand it. When people don't understand what you're trying to accomplish. How many times they say, "Fuck! You blew it. No, I was going to do this for you. Fine. That's your reaction? I couldn't do it. No way. Never. I would never be able to do that. I know. I know my views in situations like that. Why did he keep going? The value of those that he has to die for. They're too precious. They are worth too much for me to quit, for me to pull back. I will keep taking it. And he does. Those who were crucified with him were also insulting him. I mean, how do you continue doing that which somebody doesn't deserve, and they're already showing how ungrateful they are? And he goes. And verse 33 says, when the 6th hour came, darkness fell over the land until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they began saying, behold, he's calling for Elijah. Someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave him a drink, saying, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who was standing right in front of him saw the way he breathed his last, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. And that beautiful symbol of the veil being torn down, the idea of that which separated. And that's the picture I think of. I think of that beautiful picture, that woman, that's what kept that man going. That something was prohibiting this woman from being reunited, joined together with something that was precious, that was a representation of love, of unity, of commitment, of togetherness. And he is going to continue until he finds it, and he knows it's worth it because of what this means. And that veil being split is a representation of that's what it meant to him. Now we have access. Now finally those who are separated because of their sins can finally be brought to God. That's what he did it for. He did it because sin had separated us, and finally that veil, which represents all the sins of mankind, all that had kept us away from that unity and that love, and that precious way that God wants to keep us all in his fellowship. And so what a great example for us that we also would see how worth it is, how the worth, the value of seeking the lost. Something else that certainly came to my mind was, no doubt time was ticking. So no doubt there had to be a sense of urgency going through all those bags, going through all those boxes, going through all of those corners. Because if you can't find it, guess what happens? Well, it goes to the garbage dump. And if it gets to the garbage dump, you're not going to find it then. There's no way. Time was of the essence. There's a sense of, no doubt, an urgency. I think that's pretty impressive. In an hour, he found it. Put me in that truck. You can say, okay, dude, you got an hour. Are you kidding me? To me, I believe that sets the urgency, how fast, no doubt, he's going through, rummaging. Not there, okay, move on to the next one. We don't have time to spare. We've got to find it. In an hour. Notice it says that no doubt we also have this sense of urgency. No doubt those in the parable had a sense of urgency. They recognized time was ticking. We got to get to this sheep before it's too late. We have to find this ring here before something else, for some tragic event happens, before some wind comes and topples everything over. And then who knows where it's going to end up. If it goes flying through the trees and flying out the window somewhere, then good luck finding it. That's why she was urgently looking over everything. She had to find it that day. Because at least that day I know it's somewhere in the house. And as long as nothing else happens, as long as this house is standing, I have a chance. And notice there is a sense of urgency amongst our adversary. Our adversary has the same sense of urgency, which I find interesting. We turn over to Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12 in verse 7. Verse 7 says, and there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. He accuses them before our God day and night, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. The devil's mindset is, I want to inflict the majority, the greatest amount of wrath, the greatest amount of destruction. I'm going to literally rip apart every semblance of godliness, holiness, righteousness left in this soul, and I'm going to do as much damage as possible because what? I only have a short time. Consequently, the mindset of the urgency of those who are seeking. Why there is that sense of urgency, and why that sense of urgency is appropriate. Because it's a race against time. Because in one sense, while the devil is heaping all of his destruction and reaping all of his damage, the clock is ticking for him and all those that he has successfully deceived to find their place in eternity. But it says that the Lord is patient. He's patient, but there is a sense of urgency. Turn that over to 1 Peter. In 1 Peter, remember, he reminds us of the value we are. 1 Peter chapter 1, beginning in verse 7 or verse 18. He says, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. For he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for the sake of you, who through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Here's the value, the sense of its worth, and he was willing. And then we go over to 2 Peter, and he concludes this thought in chapter 3, and then brings about the sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency. He says in verse 7, 2 Peter chapter 3, but by his word, the present heavens and earth are being reserved for fire, kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. But do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like one day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you. In what sense is he patient? Not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. But notice verse 10, the clock is ticking. So there's patience, but there's an urgency that we have to maximize our time because of verse 11, or verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the elements will be destroyed with intense heat, and the earth and its works will be burned up. Since all these things are to be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be destroyed by burning, and the elements will melt with intense heat? In other words, how much of a sense of urgency is amongst those who have already been found? Those who have been found as a sense of urgency, keep living godly, keep holding on to the truth, keep keeping yourself in that saved state, because the time is ticking. How much more so for those that the Lord is patient towards those who are without? And so I just have a picture in my mind, again, this man just sorting through everything, but also realizing there's going to be a time when this thing's going to get dumped. And we've got to make sure that we go through every possible avenue. And his willingness to keep that in mind paid off. There was a sense of urgency. And all of these things are capable of bringing about a change. They're capable of bringing about a result. Very quickly, I want to go over to Luke chapter 19. In Luke chapter 19, we read of a sinner named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus has a change. It says that Jesus came because he wanted to stay at Zacchaeus' house in verse 5. My understanding of the text and the language is that the progression is that once Zacchaeus comes down from the tree, receives the Lord gladly, is that the rest of the discourse is what happens in the house. That they've gone into the house, and there has to have been some teaching, some dialogue, some things, because it says that Zacchaeus stopped in verse 8. That word is the idea of standing up, of the idea of interruption. It's the idea of all of a sudden I'm stopping the dialogue, I'm stopping the discourse, and I have something to say about it. And what's truly amazing is, no doubt, what would have been transpired in that house. Questions. Why are you staying at my house? Why did you want to talk to me? Why did you come to the tree where I was? What are you doing in Jericho? Well, he says why in the previous chapter. He says it plainly. He's not hiding it. Over Luke chapter 18, he says why in verse 31. Luke 18, verse 31 says, Then he took the 12 aside and said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things which are written through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and will be mocked, and mistreated, and spit upon, and after they have scourged him, they will kill him, and the third day he will rise again. He made sure that Zacchaeus recognized that he was worthy. I'm making this stop for you. You're worthy of my time. You're worthy of this interaction. Because it's people like you of why I'm heading to Jerusalem. I'm going because you are worth my life. I'm going to die. I'm going to shed my blood. They're going to mistreat me. It's all kinds of horrible things about me, but I'm going to endure, and I'm going to withstand the stench and the onslaught of that vile wickedness because you are worth it. Because of your value. And time is ticking. Time is of the essence. Now is the hour. I must go. And he goes. He makes his way, and he accomplishes all these things. And what's truly amazing is verse 8, it says in Luke chapter 19, verse 8, Zacchaeus stopped. Whatever was being discussed in that house, the things that Jesus was relaying to him had an impact. And it says, Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. So it truly had to have been kind of an encouraging thought. All those things that Jesus underwent when they scourged him, when they dressed him up in purple and mocked him and said, here's your king. And they spit on him and they beat him and they blindfolded him. Why don't you prophesy to us? You're so good at this. You're the Messiah. Who hit you? What was it that made him go through that? No doubt people like Zacchaeus. He no doubt had to have in his mind these kinds of people. These people, their worth, their value is what motivated him. The value is too great. I must withstand. I must endure. I must keep pressing on, and I will allow the full onslaught of their viciousness upon me because I've come to seek to save that which was lost. I got to bring it back to God. And what a beautiful image that is, and what a beautiful sentiment that is of how much he loves us, and what a great motivation for us, that we also might allow that motivation and that mindset to influence us in our obedience to the Lord. One final passage, and we'll end our sermon, but go back to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, it concludes with a man had 2 sons, and the younger of the sons came to his father, said, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Of course, we read the story. He comes home after losing everything, kind of plays the odds, considers, okay, am I going to continue eating from the slop buckets that the pigs are eating out of? Do I really want to continue this? How many servants at my father's house have more than enough bread, and I'm dying here with hunger? He says, I'm going back. but I recognize that I don't deserve to come back, so maybe he'll at least hire me as a servant. Comes home, and to his amazement finds out the father is still looking at him as a son. He doesn't want to treat him as a slave. He doesn't want to strip him of his rights as a child. He says, no, you're still my son. In other words, that diamond ring, it still had its luster, it still had its value, it still has its worth as it was in those dirty rags in that bag in the garbage truck. And that's what motivated him to keep looking for it. It has value, it has worth, and it hasn't changed. It's just it's lost. It's just, it can't be used this way. It can't honor the woman who wears it. It can't be a representation to the man who gave it to her. It can't do all those things. And so we need to bring it out of there and put it on the ring of the person who needs it. And I love that he says, give me the ring. In verse 22, the father said to the slaves, quickly bring out the best robe and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. That valued, precious ring can now be in its proper place doing what it was meant to do. And that's how God looks at us. That's why he said, put the ring on his finger. You are my son, and you were lost. Now you can properly glorify your Father. You are in your rightful place, and that's why he's done this. He has come to seek and to save the lost. And so for us, what a beautiful, beautiful picture that is of restoration for us, to realize that's how the Lord looks at us, that it was worth it to him to go through this for us, and also for us to also share that same sense of urgency, that same sense of value, and that same sense of diligence that we also would gladly jump in the trucks of this world and all it has, that we might hopefully, before it's too late, bring the gospel and help others be restored back to the Lord before it's too late. And if anyone's with us who's never obeyed the gospel, we plead and pray that you would come back, that you would come back home, that you would recognize that you have value, you have worth. And that has not changed one bit. You are just as valuable to the Lord now as you ever were when you were with him. The only thing that has changed is you've been taken from him, and he wants to restore you. And he has made it very powerfully simple. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. Confessing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, accepting all the things that come with that ownership and that submission. And I will live for him. I will be loyal to him. I will die to my allegiance to all the things of this sinful, filthy world. I want to leave the garbage truck, and I want to live in holiness and purity with you. And you can do that. And if you have gone back into the sin of the world, he's still willing to receive you. If you will simply come back, leave aside, and repent, and turn away from that which has defiled us. Come back to him. Whatever the case may be, once you come and let him clean you, let him wash you, let him forgive you, well, you accept that grace and forgiveness he has to offer to you through his Son, Jesus. Once you come and obey the gospel while we stand and sing together.